In the summer heat of 1,887 Arizona territory, a pregnant widow's simple act of kindness would change two lives forever. Martha Reyes had every reason to keep walking when she found the wounded stranger bleeding beneath that cottonwood tree. She was 8 months along, traveling alone to claim her dead husband's land, carrying barely enough water for herself. But something in Cole Mercer's weathered face made her stop. She didn't know he owned half the valley. She didn't know men were hunting him. All she knew was that no soul should die alone under the desert sun. For 6 days, they mended more than his bullet wound. They shared stories, beans from a camp stove, and the kind of honest talk that comes when two people have nothing left to lose. But would a marriage born from necessity become something neither expected? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a canvas of burnt orange and deep amber that shimmered in the July heat. Martha Reyes adjusted the wide brim of her faded bonnet and pressed a weathered hand to the small of her back, feeling the familiar ache that had become her constant companion these past weeks. 8 months along, and still she walked this God-forsaken trail toward a future she could barely imagine. Her late husband Thomas had spoken of the claim with such hope in his voice. 40 acres of good grazing land near Dry Mesa, he'd said, eyes bright with dreams of cattle and prosperity. Water rights included, Martha. We'll build something lasting there. But Thomas never saw that land. The fever took him 3 months after they'd pooled their savings to purchase the deed, leaving Martha with nothing but his wedding ring on her finger and a piece of paper that promised a new life in Arizona territory. The baby shifted inside her, a strong kick against her ribs that made her pause on the rocky trail. She placed both hands on her swollen belly and whispered softly, "Easy there, little one. We're almost to where we're going." Almost was generous. She still had 2 days of walking ahead, maybe 3 if the heat slowed her down further. The mule she'd started with had gone lame outside Tucson, sold for barely enough to buy the water and hardtack that filled her canvas satchel. Thomas's ring caught the sunlight as she reached for her canteen. The simple gold band felt loose on her finger now. She'd lost weight everywhere except her belly, the harsh journey taking its toll. She allowed herself one small sip of water, knowing she had to make it last. The next reliable water source was still a day's walk away, assuming the old prospector back in Yuma hadn't lied about the location. The cottonwood appeared like a miracle against the harsh landscape, its broad canopy offering the first real shade she'd seen in hours. Martha quickened her pace, eager for respite from the sun that seemed determined to bake the life from everything it touched. As she drew closer, she noticed something dark beneath the tree's spreading branches, not the welcome sight of another traveler's camp, but something that made her heart skip with alarm. A man lay motionless in the shade, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood had soaked through his brown duster, darkening the fabric around his left shoulder. His hat had fallen away, revealing silver-streaked hair and a face weathered by years under the open sky. Martha's first instinct was to turn away. Her mother had warned her about strangers on the frontier, about men who might take advantage of a woman alone. But something held her there. Perhaps it was the way his chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. Perhaps it was the memory of Thomas lying fevered and helpless, needing care she couldn't provide. Or perhaps it was simply that no creature, human or otherwise, deserved to die alone under the merciless sun. Cole Mercer drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of fire spreading through his shoulder and the taste of copper in his mouth. The ambush had come without warning, 3 riders emerging from the rocks as he'd made his way back from checking the northern boundary of his land. He'd managed to wound one of them before taking the bullet that sent him tumbling from his horse. The animal had bolted, leaving him stranded miles from help with blood seeping steadily from the wound. He'd crawled to the cottonwood more by instinct than conscious thought, seeking shade while his strength lasted. The broken spur ranch stretched for thousands of acres in all directions, but he might as well have been on the moon for all the good his wealth did him now. His foreman wouldn't expect him back for 2 days, and by then the vultures would have picked his bones clean. Through the haze of pain, he became aware of a shadow falling across his face. Not the shifting shadow of leaves, but something solid and still. With tremendous effort, he forced his eyes open and found himself looking up at a woman unlike any he'd ever seen on the frontier. She was clearly with child, her condition evident beneath the simple grey dress that had seen better days. But it was her face that held him, strong features unmarked by the hardness that frontier life usually carved into a person. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her brown eyes held a mixture of caution and compassion as she knelt beside him. "You're hurt bad," she said simply, her voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of Mexican heritage mixed with frontier practicality. She set down a canvas satchel and reached for the canteen at her hip. "Can you drink?" Cole tried to speak, but managed only a harsh croak. The woman, he could see the gold band on her finger, supported his head with one hand and brought the canteen to his lips with the other. The water was warm and tasted like salvation. He drank greedily until she pulled it away. "Easy," she said. "That's all I can spare right now." She corked the canteen and set it aside, then examined his wound with gentle but efficient hands. "Bullets still in there. You're losing too much blood to last much longer without help." "Can't," Cole whispered, his voice barely audible. "Nowhere to go." Martha studied the man's face, noting the lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. His clothes, though blood-stained, were well made, better than what most drifters could afford. There was something about him that didn't fit the usual pattern of frontier wanderers, but she pushed the thought aside. Whatever his story, he was dying, and she had the means to help him. "There's a line shack about 3 miles north," she said, remembering the rough map the prospector had drawn for her. "Old mining claim. Might still have a roof and walls." She looked at his wound again, calculating. "I can't carry you, but if you can walk some, I might get you there." Cole stared at her in amazement. Here was a woman clearly near her time, traveling alone through dangerous country, and she was offering to help a complete stranger who might well be an outlaw for all she knew. "Why?" he asked. Martha was quiet for a long moment, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly, where the baby had begun to stir again. "My husband died 3 months back," she said finally. "Fever took him quick, and there wasn't much I could do but watch. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone else's fight against dying, I'd take it." She stood and began gathering materials from around the base of the tree, strips of bark, dry grass, anything that might serve as bandaging. "Besides," she added without looking at him, "seems to me we all got to answer for what we do when we meet folks in need. I'd rather answer for helping than for walking away." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Martha worked to stabilize Cole enough for the journey ahead. She tore strips from her spare petticoat to create proper bandages, packed the wound as best she could with her limited supplies, and helped him to his feet with a strength that surprised them both. The line shack waited somewhere ahead in the gathering dusk, a shelter that might mean the difference between life and death. Neither of them knew that this moment, this choice by a pregnant widow to share her water with a dying stranger, would set in motion a chain of events that would transform both their lives forever. As they began their slow journey north, Martha supporting Cole's weight while he struggled to stay conscious, she hummed softly under her breath. It was a lullaby her own mother had sung, a gentle melody that seemed to ease the harsh edges of their desperate situation. Cole found himself clinging to that sound as much as to consciousness itself, wondering what manner of woman would sing to comfort a stranger while carrying such burdens of her own. The line shack materialized from the darkness like an answer to prayer, its weathered walls and sagging roof a welcome sight after 3 hours of stumbling through desert scrub. Martha's legs trembled with exhaustion as she helped Cole through the doorway, his weight growing heavier with each step they'd taken from the cottonwood tree. Inside, moonlight filtered through gaps in the roof, illuminating a single room that had clearly been abandoned for years. A rusty stove squatted in one corner, its chimney pipe askew but intact. A wooden crate served as a table, and someone had left behind a few tin cans and a moth-eaten blanket. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Cole collapsed onto the dirt floor the moment Martha released her grip on him. His breathing had grown increasingly labored during their journey, and in the pale light she could see that blood had soaked through her makeshift bandages. The bullet was still lodged in his shoulder, and without proper medical attention, infection would surely set in. "I need to see that wound properly," Martha said, kneeling beside him. She struck a match from her dwindling supply and lit the stub of a candle she'd found on the makeshift table. The flickering light revealed the true extent of his injury, worse than she'd feared, but not beyond her ability to help. Martha had learned frontier medicine by necessity. Thomas had suffered his share of injuries working their small farm back in New Mexico, and she'd patched up neighbors when the nearest doctor was days away. But this was different. The bullet had lodged deep, and removing it would require steady hands and no small amount of luck. "This is going to hurt," she warned, rolling up her sleeves. She'd cleaned her sewing needle in the candle flame and found a bottle of whiskey among the shack's abandoned supplies. "Bite down on this." She offered him a strip of leather she'd cut from her shoe. Cole managed a weak smile. "Ma'am, I've been shot before. Do what you need to do." As Martha worked by candlelight, Cole found himself studying her face in the dancing shadows. There was something remarkable about this woman, a quiet strength that reminded him of his own mother, who'd raised 5 children on a hard-scrabble ranch in Texas. But where his mother had grown bitter with hardship, this woman seemed to have found something deeper, something that allowed her to show kindness to a stranger, even while carrying her own heavy burdens. "What's your name?" he asked through gritted teeth as she probed for the bullet. "Martha," she replied without looking up from her work. "Martha Reyes." "I'm Cole Mercer." He watched her face for any sign of recognition, but she showed none. Most people in this part of Arizona knew the Mercer Nami. His family had been ranching here for 30 years, and the Broken Spur was one of the largest spreads in the territory. But Martha Reyes was clearly a newcomer, which explained why she treated him like any other wounded drifter. The bullet came free with a soft pop that made Cole grunt in pain. Martha worked quickly to clean the wound and pack it with strips torn from her petticoat. Her hands were steady and sure, and when she began humming that same lullaby he'd heard on the trail, Cole felt some of the tension leave his body. "That's a pretty song," he said when she paused to check her work. "My mother used to sing it to me." Martha's voice held a note of sadness. "She died when I was 15. Sometimes I sing it to—" She stopped abruptly, her hand moving to her belly. "To the baby," Cole finished gently. Martha nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd been trying so hard to be strong, to handle everything alone, that admitting her fears seemed like weakness. But something about this man's quiet presence made her want to speak truthfully. "I don't know what I'm doing," she confessed, wrapping the last of the bandages around his shoulder. "Thomas, me husband, he had such plans for us. The claim, the baby, our future. Now he's gone, and I'm wandering through the desert like some lost soul, about to bring a child into a world I can barely manage myself." Cole was quiet for a long moment. In his 57 years, he'd known many women, but none who combined such practical competence with such honest vulnerability. Martha Reyes had just performed frontier surgery with the skill of a trained physician, yet she was humble enough to admit her fears about the future. "You saved my life tonight," he said finally. "A woman who can do that can handle whatever comes next." Martha settled back against the shack's wall, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The baby was quiet now, as if sensing her need for rest. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance, their voices carrying across the empty landscape like warnings. "Tell me about him," Cole said. "Your husband." Martha's fingers found Thomas's ring again, turning it slowly. He was a dreamer, always talking about what we'd build together, the life we'd have. He worked himself to death trying to make enough money to get us started out here. She was quiet for a moment. "Good man, but maybe too good for this world, too trusting." "What do you mean?" "The fever that took him, he caught it helping our neighbor's family when their well went bad. I told him to stay away, that we couldn't risk it, But Thomas couldn't stand to see children suffering. Martha's voice grew thick with memory. He said some things were more important than being safe. Cole understood. He'd known men like Thomas Reyes, decent, hard-working souls who believed the world would reward their goodness. Most of them ended up disappointed or dead. But occasionally, their faith in human nature inspired others to be better than they might have been otherwise. "You're like him," Cole observed. "What do you mean?" "You could have walked past me today. Probably should have, woman in your condition traveling alone. But you stopped. You helped. That's not common sense, that's something else." Martha considered this as she watched the candle flame dance in the still air. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just stubborn. My mother always said I never could leave well enough alone." They talked through the night, sharing stories and observations, while Cole's fever broke and Martha's fears found voice in the darkness. She told him about the claim waiting near Dry Mesa, about Thomas's dreams of raising cattle and building a legacy. He spoke carefully about his own past, mentioning years of ranching without revealing the true extent of his holdings. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, both realized that something had shifted between them. The desperate circumstances that brought them together had created an unexpected intimacy, not romantic, not yet, but something deeper than mere acquaintance. "I should let you rest," Martha said, noting that Cole's color had improved significantly. "The fever's broken and the bleeding stopped. You'll heal given time." "What about you? Where will you go?" Martha gathered her few belongings, preparing to continue her journey. "The claim's still waiting. Baby's due soon, and I need to get settled before—" She stopped, unable to finish the thought. Cole watched her preparing to leave and felt something twist in his chest. This woman had saved his life, asked for nothing in return, and was now heading back into the desert to face an uncertain future alone. Everything he'd been taught about honor and decency demanded that he repay the debt somehow. But more than obligation drove his next words. In one night, Martha Reyes had shown him a kind of strength and grace he'd almost forgotten existed in the world. The thought of her walking away, of never seeing her again, felt like losing something precious before he'd fully understood its value. "Martha," he called as she reached the door. "Wait." She turned back, and in the morning light, filtering through the gaps in the roof, Cole saw not just the woman who'd saved his life, but someone who might be capable of saving something else entirely, the part of himself he'd thought was lost forever. Cole's voice stopped Martha at the threshold, her hand resting on the weathered doorframe. Something in his tone made her turn back, and she found him struggling to sit up, his face pale but determined. "Stay," he said simply, "at least for today. Let me regain some strength, and I'll help you get to your claim safely." Martha hesitated. Every instinct told her to keep moving. The baby could come any time now, and she needed to reach the claim before her condition made travel impossible. But Cole was right about the dangers. A woman alone on the frontier faced threats that went beyond heat and thirst. "I can't pay you for guiding services," she said finally. "I'm not asking for payment. I'm asking for the chance to repay a debt." The morning sun climbed higher as Martha made her decision. She set down her satchel and returned to Cole's side, noting that his color had indeed improved through the night. The fever had broken completely, and though he was still weak from blood loss, he would live. "One day," she agreed, "but then I have to keep moving." Cole nodded, settling back against the wall with visible relief. "There's fence work needs doing around this place. Rails are down, and the well needs clearing. Good, honest work while we both recover our strength." Martha looked around the abandoned line shack with new eyes. Someone had built this place with care years ago. The walls were solid, the roof mostly intact, despite its weathered appearance. With some work, it could be made properly habitable. "Whose land is this?" she asked. Cole was quiet for a moment. "Belongs to a spread called the Broken Spur. Owner won't mind if we make some repairs in exchange for shelter." It wasn't entirely a lie. As owner of the Broken Spur, he certainly didn't object to improvements on his property. But the deception sat uneasily with him. Martha had been nothing but honest in her dealings with him, and here he was holding back the truth about his identity. They spent the morning assessing what needed to be done. The well, as Cole had suspected, was clogged with debris but still good. Martha proved surprisingly handy with tools, and together they managed to clear the pump and get fresh water flowing. The taste of cool, clean water after days of rationed warmth was a luxury that brought tears to Martha's eyes. Thomas would have loved this place, she said, sitting beside the well to rest. He always said the secret to good ranching was reliable water. Cole watched her profile as she spoke, noting the way her expression softened when she mentioned her late husband. There was no bitterness in her voice, only wistful sadness for dreams cut short. He found himself curious about the man who had inspired such loyalty in this remarkable woman. "How long were you married?" he asked. 3 years. Met him at a church social in Las Cruces. He was new to the territory then, full of plans and hope. Martha smiled at the memory. "I thought he was foolish at first, too, trusting, too optimistic for frontier life. But there was something about his faith in people that made you want to live up to it." As the day progressed, they fell into an easy working rhythm. Cole's strength returned gradually, and Martha proved capable of tasks that would have challenged many men. She rebuilt the fence rails with steady precision while he cleared brush and repaired the shack's roof. Their conversation flowed naturally, covering everything from practical matters to deeper questions about life and loss. "You never had children?" Martha asked during their midday rest, noting how naturally Cole had taken to preparing their simple meal. "No," Cole said quietly. "I was married once, long time ago. Sarah died in childbirth along with our son." Martha's face filled with compassion. "I'm sorry, that must have been 23 years ago," Cole interrupted gently. "I learned to live with it, but I never learned to try again. Seemed safer to keep to myself." The admission hung between them, explaining much about the solitary man she'd found bleeding under the cottonwood tree. Martha understood something about walls built around broken hearts. She'd been constructing her own since Thomas's death. As afternoon wore into evening, they worked side by side, mending the fence that surrounded the line shack's small corral. The physical labor felt good after weeks of nothing but walking, and Martha found herself humming as she worked. Cole listened to her melodies with growing appreciation, recognizing that music was as natural to her as breathing. "Sing the words," he said during a pause in their work. Martha blushed slightly. "It's just an old song my grandmother taught me, about a woman waiting for her love to return from war. I'd like to hear it." Her voice, when she began to sing, was rich and clear despite the desert air. The Spanish lyrics spoke of longing and faith, of love that endures despite separation and uncertainty. Cole found himself moved by both the beauty of her voice and the emotion she brought to the ancient words. "That's beautiful," he said when she finished. "Music helps with the loneliness," Martha admitted. "Out here, sometimes your own voice is the only company you have." As darkness fell, they shared a simple supper of beans and hardtack beside a small fire Cole had built outside the shack. The flames painted their faces in warm, golden light, and for the first time in months, Martha felt something approaching peace. "Tell me about the broken spur," she said. "You seem to know it well." Cole chose his words carefully. "It's a good spread. Fair owner, from what I hear. Takes care of his people." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "Been around these parts for 30 years or so. Must be successful to last that long." "Success isn't just about money out here," Cole said thoughtfully. "It's about understanding the land, respecting it. Too many people come to the territory thinking they can force it to bend to their will. The smart ones learn to work with what they're given." Martha nodded, thinking of her own dreams for the claim awaiting her. Thomas had chosen the land carefully, studying maps and talking to other settlers. But maps couldn't tell you about the character of a place, about whether it would welcome you or fight you every step of the way. "Are you worried?" Cole asked, as if reading her thoughts. "About the claim, I mean." "Every day," Martha admitted. "I know nothing about ranching on my own. Thomas was going to teach me, but..." She shrugged. Now I'll have to learn as I go, with a baby to care for besides. Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. This woman's honesty continued to amaze him. She had every reason to be terrified of the future, yet she faced it with a courage that humbled him. In his world of wealth and power, he'd forgotten that real strength often came from those who had the least to lose and the most at stake. "You're stronger than you think," he said finally. "I've seen how you work, how you think through problems. The land will teach you what you need to know." Martha looked at him across the fire, seeing something in his weathered features that spoke of deep knowledge earned through long experience. This man knew more about surviving in harsh country than he'd let on, and she found herself grateful for his quiet confidence in her abilities. As they banked the fire and prepared for sleep, Martha felt the baby moving restlessly inside her. The little one seemed to sense the changes ahead, the approaching moment when their shared journey would end and separate lives would begin. "Cole," she said as they settled into their respective corners of the shack. "Thank you, not just for the help today, but for—" She struggled to find words for what his presence had meant. "For reminding me that kindness still exists in the world." In the darkness, Cole smiled. If she only knew how much her own kindness had reminded him of the same thing. Dawn brought the sound of mourning doves calling from the mesquite, their soft voices drifting through the repaired walls of the line shack. Martha woke to find Cole already up, tending a small fire outside where coffee was brewing in a battered tin pot. The domestic normalcy of the scene struck her with unexpected force. How long had it been since she'd awakened to the comfortable sounds of someone else going about morning tasks? "Sleep well?" Cole asked, offering her a cup of the strong black coffee. "Better than I have in weeks," Martha admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. The coffee was Cowboy strong, the kind that could wake the dead, but it tasted like luxury after her recent diet of stream water and rationed supplies. They shared a breakfast of hardtack and dried beef while planning the day's work. Cole's shoulder was still tender, but the clean mountain air seemed to be speeding his healing. Martha moved with the careful grace of a woman approaching her time, but showed no signs of slowing down. "There's a creek about half a mile east," Cole mentioned. "Good place to wash clothes, and the water runs clear and cold." Martha looked down at her travel-worn dress with its bloodstains from tending Cole's wound. The prospect of clean clothes and a proper wash was almost irresistibly appealing. "Is it safe?" "I'll come with you. Keep watch while you tend to what needs tending." The creek proved to be a small oasis in the harsh landscape, fed by springs that bubbled up from deep underground. Cottonwoods lined its banks, their leaves rustling in the morning breeze. Martha knelt beside the clear water and began scrubbing her spare dress, while Cole positioned himself on a rise where he could watch the surrounding country. "Tell me about your family," Martha called to him as she worked. "Besides your wife, I mean. Brothers, sisters?" Cole was quiet for so long that Martha wondered if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "Had a brother, Jake, younger than me by 5 years. He died in a range war about 10 years back. I'm sorry. Jake was always too quick to fight, too slow to think. Got mixed up with some bad men who convinced him that might made right." Cole's voice grew bitter. "I tried to talk sense into him, but he wouldn't listen. Said I'd gone soft, forgotten what it meant to be a real man." Martha continued her washing, sensing that Cole needed to tell this story at his own pace. The water was so cold it made her hands ache, but she welcomed the sharp clarity it brought to her thoughts. "Range war got ugly," Cole continued. "Small ranches against the big spreads, everybody convinced the other side was trying to steal what was theirs. Jake chose the wrong side, and when the shooting started, he stopped, unable to finish. You were on opposite sides. I tried to stay neutral, but neutrality's hard to maintain when bullets start flying. In the end, I had to choose between my principles and my brother's life." Cole's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I chose my principles. Jake died thinking I'd betrayed him." Martha finished washing and wrung out the dress, hanging it on a low branch to dry. She made her way up the rise to where Cole sat, settling beside him with a soft grunt as her condition made the movement awkward. "That must have been an awful choice to face," she said simply. Cole looked at her, expecting to see judgment in her eyes, but finding only compassion. "Most people think I should have backed my brother regardless of right and wrong. Most people haven't had to live with the consequences of their choices the way you have." Martha picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in her hands. "My grandmother used to say that the hardest decisions are the ones where everybody gets hurt no matter what you choose." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the creek flow past while Martha's dress dried in the morning sun. The baby stirred restlessly, and Martha placed a hand on her belly with a small smile. "Active little one today," she said. "How much longer?" Cole asked. The midwife back in Las Cruces said another few weeks, but babies come on their own schedule. Martha's expression grew thoughtful. "I keep wondering what kind of world I'm bringing this child into, what kind of mother I'll be without Thomas to help me." Cole studied her profile, noting the strength in her jawline and the determined set of her shoulders. "I think you'll be a fine mother. You've got the heart for it." "What makes you say that?" "The way you sing to the baby even before it's born. The way you stop to help a stranger when you had every reason to keep walking. The way you see the good in people even when they can't see it in themselves." Martha felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected kindness in his words. Since Thomas's death, she'd been so focused on survival that she'd forgotten to think about the person she wanted to be for her child. "Thomas used to say that the best gift we could give our baby was showing them how to treat other people with kindness," she said. "I want to believe that still matters in a world that seems so hard sometimes." "It matters," Cole said firmly, "maybe more than ever." As the morning progressed, they made their way back to the line shack and continued their repairs. Cole proved surprisingly skilled at domestic tasks, and Martha realized that his years of bachelor living had taught him self-sufficiency in areas where many men remained helpless. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked, watching him prepare their midday meal with practiced efficiency. "Trial and error, mostly. After Sarah died, I had to learn or starve." Cole smiled wryly. "Made some memorable mistakes in the early days. I'm still learning myself." Thomas did most of the cooking, said it relaxed him after long days in the fields. Martha accepted the plate he offered her. "I never realized how much I took for granted until I had to do everything myself." As they ate, Martha found herself studying Cole's hand-strong and capable, scarred from years of hard work, but gentle when he'd helped her down from the creek bank. They were the hands of a man who'd known both violence and tenderness, who'd learned to build as well as destroy. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "When you found yourself alone after your wife died, how did you keep going? How did you find reasons to get up each morning?" Cole set down his fork and considered the question seriously. "For a long time, I didn't have good reasons. I just kept moving because stopping meant thinking too much about what I'd lost." He was quiet for a moment. "Eventually, I realized that Sarah wouldn't have wanted me to stop living just because she couldn't be there to share it with me." Martha nodded slowly. "Thomas used to say that love wasn't just about being together, it was about carrying the best parts of each other forward into whatever came next." "Sounds like a wise man." He was. Too wise for his own good sometimes. Martha smiled sadly. He saw the good in everyone, believed the world would reward kindness with kindness. I used to think that made him naive. Now I wonder if it made him braver than the rest of us. As afternoon faded into evening, they completed their work on the line shack. The little building now looked like a proper home, rather than an abandoned shelter. The fence was solid, the well ran clear, and the roof no longer leaked. It was a transformation that pleased them both, though neither spoke of the deeper changes taking place in their own lives. "I should read for a while before dark," Martha said, pulling her worn Bible from her satchel. Cole watched her settle against the wall with the book in her lap, noting how her face softened in the lamplight. "Read aloud, if you don't mind. I haven't heard scripture in years." Martha began with Psalm 23, her voice clear and steady as she spoke, the familiar words about green pastures and still waters. Cole found himself remembering Sunday mornings from his childhood, his mother's voice reading from the same passages while the family gathered around the kitchen table. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," Martha read, and Cole thought about shepherds and sheep, about protection and guidance. Looking at this woman who'd shown such care for a stranger, he wondered if he was witnessing a kind of shepherding himself, the gentle guidance of one lost soul helping another find their way. As darkness settled over the desert, they banked the fire and prepared for their second night in the line shack. Tomorrow, Martha would continue her journey to the claim, and Cole would have to decide what came next in his own life. But tonight, in the soft glow of candlelight, with Martha's voice still echoing in the quiet air, both of them allowed themselves to imagine that some kinds of shelter were about more than walls and roofs. That sometimes the most important refuge came from the simple presence of another human being who understood what it meant to lose everything and keep walking anyway. The third morning brought with it a restlessness that neither Martha nor Cole could quite name. They moved through their morning routines with the efficiency of people who'd been sharing space for weeks rather than days. But underneath the comfortable familiarity lay an unspoken awareness that their time together was drawing to a close. Cole had fashioned a more comfortable seat for Martha from an old saddle blanket and a wooden crate, positioning it where she could watch him work while resting her back. Her condition was becoming more pronounced, and he noticed how she paused more frequently, her hand pressed to her lower back or her belly. "You're worried about something," Martha observed as she watched him repair a section of fence that was already perfectly functional. Cole straightened, caught in his nervous activity. "Just want to make sure everything's solid before." He stopped, realizing he was about to admit something he hadn't fully acknowledged to himself. "Before I leave," Martha finished gently. "Yes." They worked in thoughtful silence for a while, both aware that they were approaching a crossroads. Neither had expected when Martha first knelt beside that cottonwood tree. The beans Cole prepared for their midday meal had become a kind of ritual simple food shared with simple honesty, the kind of communion that made ordinary moments feel significant. "Tell me about the claim," Cole said as they ate. "What are your plans once you reach it?" Martha set down her spoon and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the deed Thomas had left her. 40 acres with water rights. Previous owner started a small cabin but never finished it. Thomas thought we could run maybe 50 head of cattle once we got established. Cole studied the deed, recognizing the land immediately. It bordered the eastern edge of his own property, good grazing country with reliable water. He'd actually considered buying it himself when it first came available, but had decided he had more than enough land to manage. "It's good country," he said carefully, "near the Broken Spur's eastern boundary. Is that the spread you mentioned? The one that owns this land?" "Yes." Cole folded the deed and handed it back, his conscience wrestling with the growing web of half-truths he'd woven. "You'll be neighbors, in a sense." Martha tucked the deed away, unaware of the irony in his words. "I hope the owner's as fair as you say. I'll need to establish good relationships with the neighboring ranchers if I'm going to make this work." "I'm sure he'll be reasonable," Cole said, meaning it completely. As owner of the Broken Spur, he'd make certain that Martha Reyes received every assistance a neighbor could provide. But the deception was wearing on him, and he found himself searching for a way to tell her the truth without shattering the trust they'd built. As afternoon arrived, Martha began experiencing stronger contractions, not labor yet, but the body's way of preparing for the event that was clearly approaching soon. Cole noticed her discomfort and insisted she rest while he completed the remaining work around the line shack. "I can't just sit here while you do all the work," Martha protested, even as another contraction made her pause. "You can and you will," Cole said firmly. "You've done more than your share already." Martha settled onto the makeshift seat, grateful for the rest despite her protests. Watching Cole work, she found herself noticing details she'd missed before: the way he moved, with unconscious grace despite his size, the careful precision he brought to even the smallest tasks, the unconscious authority in his voice when he made decisions about the repairs. "You're used to being in charge," she observed. Cole looked up from the fence post he was setting. What makes you say that? The way you approach problems, the way you organize work. You're not just a drifting cowhand, you've run crews, made decisions that affected other people's lives. Cole was quiet for a long moment, impressed by her perceptiveness. I've had some responsibility over the years, he admitted. What kind of responsibility? The question hung in the air between them. Cole could feel the weight of his deception, the growing complexity of maintaining a false identity with someone who'd been nothing but honest with him. But revealing his true circumstances would change everything between them, and he wasn't ready for that change. Range work mostly, he said finally. Foreman jobs here and there. It wasn't entirely Lee had worked as a foreman on his own ranch for more years than he cared to count. But it wasn't the complete truth either, and Martha's knowing look suggested she sensed the gaps in his story. We all have things we don't talk about, she said gently, her hand moving to her belly as another contraction passed. I won't press you for more than you're willing to share. Cole felt a sharp pang of guilt at her kindness. Here was a woman who'd saved his life, asked nothing in return, and was now offering him the grace of privacy, even when his evasions must be obvious to her. She deserved better than half-truths and carefully edited stories. As evening approached, Cole prepared their meal with extra care, adding wild onions he'd found growing near the creek and brewing coffee strong enough to cut through the desert chill that would come with darkness. Martha watched him work, noting again the easy competence that spoke of long experience with outdoor cooking. Cole, she said as they shared their simple supper, I want you to know that these past few days have meant more to me than I know how to express. Cole looked up from his plate, seeing something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. After Thomas died, I felt like I was drowning in loneliness, Martha continued. Not just missing him, though I do, but feeling like I'd forgotten how to be around people, how to talk and laugh and share ordinary moments. She paused, choosing her words carefully. You've reminded me that I'm still alive, still capable of connection with another human being. Martha, let me finish. She held up a hand, smiling. I know you're planning to move on once. You're sure I'm safely to my claim. I understand that, and I won't ask you to change your plans. But I want you to know that meeting you, having these days together, it's been a gift I never expected. Cole set down his coffee cup, overwhelmed by the simple sincerity in her words. In his world of business dealings and social obligations, people rarely spoke with such direct honesty about their feelings. Martha's openness was both refreshing and intimidating. The gift has been mutual, he said quietly, more than you know. They finished their meal in comfortable silence, both aware that they were approaching the kind of moment that could change the trajectory of two lives. The fire crackled between them, sending shadows dancing across their faces, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. I keep thinking about what you said, Martha said finally, about your brother, about choosing principles over family loyalty. Cole tensed, unsure where she was heading with this. I've been wondering if there's such a thing as being too principled, Martha continued. If sometimes the right choice is the one that keeps people together instead of the one that keeps you morally pure. What do you mean? Martha was quiet for a moment, her hands resting on her belly where the baby was stirring. Thomas was like that, always choosing the righteous path even when it cost us. He gave away money we needed to help neighbors who were worse off. He spent time with sick people when he should have been protecting his own health. Part of me admired him for it, but part of me resented the way his goodness left me alone to deal with the practical consequences. Do you think he was wrong? I think he was human, trying to do right in a world that doesn't always reward righteousness. Martha looked at Cole across the fire. I think you're the same way, trying to carry burdens that maybe you don't have to carry alone. Cole felt the truth of her words like a physical weight. For years, he'd isolated himself behind walls of wealth and responsibility, convinced that keeping his distance from others was the safest path for everyone involved. But Martha was suggesting a different possibility, that connection might be worth the risk of hurt. What if someone's been alone so long they've forgotten how to be anything else, he asked. Then maybe they need someone patient enough to help them remember, Martha replied simply. The baby chose that moment to give a particularly strong kick, making Martha gasp and smile simultaneously. Cole found himself moved by the sight this woman, carrying new life into an uncertain world, facing the future with such courage and grace. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward her belly. Martha nodded, and Cole moved to kneel beside her chair. When he placed his large hand gently on her rounded stomach, the baby immediately responded with a series of strong movements that made them both laugh. "Strong little one," Cole said softly, wonder evident in his voice. "Takes after its mother, I hope," Martha replied, covering his hand with her own. The touch was innocent, but the intimacy of the moment, two people sharing the miracle of life, stirring within, created a connection that went beyond words. Cole found himself thinking about the child he and Sarah had lost, about the family life that had been taken from him before he'd truly understood its value. "Thank you," he said quietly, not moving his hand. "For what?" "For letting me be part of this, even in a small way." Martha looked down at their joined hands resting on her belly, seeing in the gesture everything that had brought them to this moment: need for human connection, her need for someone to share the burden of hope and fear that came with bringing new life into the world. "We should probably get some rest," she said finally, though neither of them moved to break the contact. "Probably," Cole agreed, but he remained kneeling beside her chair, reluctant to end the moment. When they finally did separate and prepare for sleep, both carried with them the memory of that simple touch and what it had revealed about the depths of longing they'd both been carrying. As Martha settled into her corner of the shack and Cole banked the fire, both realized that the morning would bring more than just another day of travel toward an uncertain destination. It would bring the moment when they'd have to decide whether the connection they'd discovered was strong enough to change the carefully laid plans that had brought them together under that cottonwood tree. The fourth morning brought an end to their careful pretense that time could be held at bay indefinitely. Martha's contractions were coming more regularly now, still hours apart, but strong enough to make her pause in her movements. The baby was preparing for its arrival, and both she and Cole knew that remaining at the line shack was no longer an option. "We need to get you to your claim today," Cole said as he helped her to her feet after a particularly strong contraction. "You'll want to be settled before the baby comes." Martha nodded, though the thought of leaving their makeshift sanctuary filled her with unexpected sadness. These 4 days had given her something she hadn't realized. She needed a glimpse of what it felt like to have a partner again, someone to share the daily tasks and quiet conversations that made life bearable. As they prepared to leave, Cole made a discovery that changed everything. While gathering his few belongings, his fingers found the expensive pocket watch his father had given him, a family heirloom engraved with the Mercer coat of arms. The watch had slipped from his vest pocket during the ambush and lay hidden in the corner where he'd first collapsed. Martha noticed him holding the gleaming timepiece, her eyes widening as she took in its obvious value. The watch was clearly not something a drifting cowhand would own. It spoke of wealth, of family connections, of a life far removed from the hardscrabble existence Cole had implied. "That's beautiful," she said carefully, sensing that the discovery meant more than he was saying. Cole closed the watch and slipped it into his pocket, but not before Martha had seen the intricate engraving. "Family piece," he said simply, offering no further explanation. But Martha was observant, and the sight of that expensive watch connected with other small details she'd noticed over the past few days: Cole's educated speech, his easy authority, his knowledge of land values and ranching operations. A picture was beginning to form, though she couldn't yet see its complete shape. "Cole," she said as they prepared to leave the line shack, "I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll give me an honest answer." Cole tensed, sensing what was coming. "Are you who you've told me you are?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Cole looked at Martha's face, seeing not accusation, but a simple request for truth from someone who'd been nothing but truthful with him. The weight of his deception felt suddenly unbearable. "No," he said quietly, "I'm not." Martha absorbed this admission without visible surprise, as if she'd been expecting it. "Who are you, really?" Cole took a deep breath, knowing that his answer would change everything between them. My name is Cole Mercer. I own the Broken Spur Ranch. All of it, this line shack, the land your claim borders, most of the valley from here to Dry Mesa. Martha was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Why didn't you tell me? At first, because I was half dead, and it didn't seem important, Cole said honestly. Then because I liked the way you treated me when you thought I was nobody special, and finally because I was afraid that knowing the truth would change things between us. Change things how? Cole struggled to articulate fears he'd never voiced before. People act differently around money, around power. They want things, or they feel inferior, or they assume your wealth means you can't understand their problems. He met her eyes. You saw me as just a man who needed help. I haven't been seen that way in a very long time. Martha walked to the window of the line shack, looking out at the desert landscape where they'd shared so many honest conversations. The news that Cole was wealthy enough to own vast tracts of land should have been shocking, but somehow it felt like the final piece of a puzzle she'd been unconsciously solving. The way you knew exactly how to repair this place, she said slowly, the way you talked about the Broken Spur owner, as if you knew him personally, the quality of your clothes before they got blood-stained, it all makes sense now. Are you angry? Martha turned back to face him, and Cole was surprised to see not anger in her expression but something closer to sadness. I'm disappointed that you didn't trust me with the truth, but I understand why you kept it to yourself. Do you? I've been thinking about what you said about your brother, about choosing principles over family. I wonder if you've been choosing isolation over connection for so long that you've forgotten there might be another option. Cole felt the truth of her words like a physical blow. Maybe I have. Martha moved carefully back to where he stood, her hand pressing against her lower back as another contraction passed. The question is, what do we do now? What do you mean? I mean that in a few hours I'm going to reach my claim and start trying to build a life there. And you're going to have to decide whether you're going back to your big house and your isolated existence, or whether these past 4 days meant something more than just passing time. Cole stared at her, amazed by her directness. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've fallen in love with the man who shared beans with me around a campfire and listened to me sing lullabies to my unborn child. I don't know yet how I feel about the wealthy rancher who owns half the valley, but I'd like the chance to find out. The admission hung between them, brave and vulnerable and completely honest. Cole felt his carefully constructed defenses crumbling in the face of her courage. Martha, you don't understand what you're saying. I'm not good at this, at being close to people, at letting them matter. I've been alone so long that I don't know if I remember how to be anything else. Then maybe it's time to learn, Martha said simply. Maybe it's time to stop choosing safety over the possibility of something real. Cole looked at this remarkable woman who'd saved his life and was now offering to save something else entirely, the part of himself he'd thought was beyond redemption. The baby stirred in her belly, reminding them both that new life was about to enter the world, bringing with it all the mess and beauty and terrifying vulnerability that came with loving someone more than your own safety. If I stay, Cole said carefully, if I try to be part of this, your life, the baby's life, I can't promise I won't make mistakes. I can't promise I won't hurt you by being clumsy with things that matter. I'm not asking for promises, Martha replied. I'm asking for honesty and effort and the willingness to try. The rest we'll figure out as we go. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the line shack that had sheltered them through their transformation from strangers to something approaching family, both realized they were walking toward a future neither had planned, but both were finally brave enough to embrace. The claim awaited, with its unfinished cabin and its 40 acres of possibility. But more than that, a new kind of life awaited, done, built not on the careful isolation that had protected them from further loss, but on the radical act of choosing love despite its risks. Martha's contractions were growing stronger as they prepared to make the final walk to her land. Soon, very soon, a new soul would enter the world, and two adults who'd found each other in the desert would discover whether love could indeed grow strong enough to shelter a family through whatever storms might come. They had walked less than a mile from the line shack when the sound of approaching horses made Cole stiffen with alarm. 3 riders appeared on the ridge ahead, silhouetted against the morning sky like harbingers of trouble. Cole recognized them immediately, the same men who'd ambushed him 4 days earlier, and they were riding hard in their direction. "Get behind that boulder," Cole told Martha urgently, his hand moving instinctively to the gun he no longer wore. His weapons had been lost in the ambush, leaving them defenseless against whatever the riders intended. But before Martha could move to cover, a 4th rider appeared from the opposite direction, approaching at a gallop. This one Cole recognized with relief. It was his foreman, Jim Hawkins, and behind him rode 2 of the Broken Spur's most trusted hands. "Boss," Jim called out as he reined in his horse. "Thank God you're alive. We've been searching for you since your horse came back riderless." The word "boss" hung in the air like a revelation. Martha looked from Jim to Cole, seeing in the foreman's deference the final confirmation of Cole's true identity. But there was no time to process this information fully, because the 3 hostile riders had spotted the group and were now approaching with obvious hostile intent. "Those the men who bushwhacked you?" Jim asked, his hand moving to his rifle. "Yes," Cole confirmed. "Martha, get down." But Martha was in the grip of a powerful contraction, unable to move as pain seized her body. The timing couldn't have been worse here in the open desert. With danger approaching and no shelter in sight, her body was beginning the process of bringing new life into the world. "The baby's coming," she gasped, clutching Cole's arm. Jim's eyes widened as he took in Martha's condition and the intimate way Cole supported her. "Boss, who is this lady?" "Someone under my protection," Cole said firmly. "Jim, I need you to get her to safety while I deal with these men." "You're not armed, and there's 3 of them," Jim protested. The hostile riders had closed to within shouting distance now, and their leader, a scarred man named Dutch Morrison, called out with mock friendliness. "Well, well, Cole Mercer and his rescue party. Thought you were dead, Mercer." "Disappointed?" Cole called back, positioning himself between the riders and Martha. Dutch laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Not yet, but I plan to remedy that situation. You and your brother Jake cost our operation a lot of money when you chose the wrong side in the range war. Time to settle accounts." Cole felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert morning. These weren't just casual raiders, they were men with a specific grudge, connected to the conflict that had torn his family apart years earlier. The past he'd tried to escape was catching up with him at the worst possible moment. "What do you want, Morrison?" "What I've always wanted. The Broken Spur. Your land, your cattle, everything Jake promised us before you got him killed with your high-minded principles." Martha gripped Cole's arm tighter as another contraction seized her. Between waves of pain, she was beginning to understand the larger picture. Cole's brother had made promises to these men, promises that Cole's moral stance had prevented him from keeping. Now they were here to collect what they believed they were owed. "Jake had no authority to promise you anything," Cole said. "The Broken Spur was never his to give." "Maybe not legally," Dutch replied, "but we figure a dead man can't object to new ownership arrangements." Jim and his men had quietly spread out, trying to flank the hostile riders while they talked. But Martha's condition made any kind of fighting retreat impossible. She was going into active labor here in the open desert, with bullets about to fly and no shelter except what the men around her could provide. "There's something you need to know," Cole called out, playing for time while his men maneuvered into position. "I'm not the last of the Mercers anymore." Dutch's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Cole looked down at Martha, seeing in her pain-filled eyes not fear but a fierce determination to protect the life she carried. In that moment, he made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. He chose connection over safety, family over isolation. "This is Martha Mercer," he said clearly, "my wife, and in about an hour she's going to give birth to the next generation of this family." The lie came so naturally that it surprised even Cole. But as he spoke the words, He realized they expressed a truth deeper than legal documents or wedding ceremonies. In every way that mattered, Martha had become his family, and he was prepared to defend that family with his life. Martha's eyes widened at Cole's declaration, but she understood immediately what he was doing. By claiming her as his wife, he was making her attack a personal affront that his men would fight to prevent. More than that, he was publicly committing himself to the future they'd only begun to imagine. "Well, ain't that touching?" Dutch sneered. "A deathbed wedding. Don't change nothing, Mercer. Dead men don't need wives or babies." "They do need proper burial, though," Jim Hawkins said coldly, his rifle now trained on Dutch. "And you boys are about to find out what that feels like." The standoff stretched taut as both sides calculated odds and angles. Martha's contractions were coming faster now, and she could feel the baby preparing to enter a world where gunfire and violence threatened to be its first welcome. But then something unexpected happened. From the direction of Martha's claim came the sound of more horses, and soon a group of riders appeared, neighbors she'd never met, drawn by reports of trouble in their territory. Among them was the local sheriff, alerted by Jim Hawkins' men when they'd begun searching for their missing boss. Dutch Morrison looked around at the growing number of armed men surrounding his small group and made a quick calculation. 3 against 2 had been acceptable odds. 3 against 8 was suicide. "This ain't over, Mercer," he called out as he wheeled his horse around. "You can't guard your back forever." "Maybe not," Cole replied, "but I can guard it long enough." As the hostile riders retreated, Martha's labor intensified dramatically. The stress and adrenaline had accelerated the process, and it was clear that the baby would not wait for proper shelter or medical assistance. "We need to get her inside somewhere," Jim said urgently. "The claim," Martha gasped between contractions. "There's a cabin foundation, some walls." As the group rode hard toward Martha's land, Cole cradled her against his chest, whispering words of encouragement and promise. The deception he'd maintained for days had finally been stripped away, replaced by a truth more fundamental than ownership papers or bank accounts. He was a man in love with a woman who was about to give birth to a child that would bind them together more surely than any legal ceremony ever could. The broken spur stretched around them in all directions, but for the first time in years, Cole understood that land was just dirt and grass, without people to give it meaning. The real foundation of any ranch, any life, any future worth building was love, messy, complicated, risky love that chose connection over safety and family over solitude. As Martha's contractions reached their peak and the unfinished cabin came into view, Cole realized he was about to discover whether he had the courage to build a life on that foundation. The baby was coming, whether the world was ready or not. And in that moment of ultimate vulnerability and hope, 2 people who'd found each other in the desert prepared to become 3 people who would face whatever came next together. The unfinished cabin that awaited them on Martha's claim was little more than 4 walls and a dream, but it represented shelter in a moment when shelter meant the difference between life and death. Cole carried Martha inside while Jim Hawkins and the other men established a defensive perimeter around the small structure. "She needs help," Cole said urgently as Martha gripped his hand through another powerful contraction. "Is there a doctor in Dry Mesa?" 2 hours' ride, the sheriff replied. "But there's a midwife closer, Rosa Delgado, about 30 minutes south. I can send someone." "Do it," Cole ordered, then caught himself. These weren't his men to command, but the authority in his voice came naturally when people he loved were in danger. As one of the riders galloped off to fetch the midwife, Cole found himself confronting the reality of what was about to happen. Martha was going to give birth here, in this half-built cabin, with hostile men potentially circling back and no medical help immediately available. Everything he'd tried to control in his carefully ordered life was spinning beyond his reach. "Cole," Martha said softly, her voice strained but steady, "I need you to listen to me." He knelt beside the makeshift bed Jim had constructed from saddle blankets and his own coat. "I'm here. If something happens to Maeve, the birth goes wrong, I need you to promise me something." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Cole said fiercely. Promise me you'll take care of the baby, not just financially, but really take care of it. Teach it to be strong and kind, and to see the good in people the way Thomas did. Cole felt tears burning his eyes. Martha, you're going to be fine. You're going to raise this baby yourself. Maybe. But if not, I need to know that my child will have someone who understands what love really means. Martha's grip on his hand tightened as another contraction peaked. You do understand, don't you? After these past days together, you remember what it feels like to be part of something bigger than yourself. Before Cole could answer, Jim appeared in the doorway with troubling news. Boss, we've got riders on the horizon. Can't tell if it's Morrison's bunch or more neighbors, but we should be ready for anything. Cole looked out through the gaps in the cabin walls at the surrounding landscape. From a strategic standpoint, their position was terrible, trapped in an unfinished building with a woman in labor and limited ammunition. But from a human standpoint, it was exactly where they needed to be. Martha needed shelter and care, and he was going to provide both, regardless of the tactical disadvantages. How long until the midwife arrives? He asked. Rosa's fast, but with the baby coming this quick, Jim shrugged, could be close. Martha's contractions were now coming every few minutes, each one stronger than the last. Between the waves of pain, she maintained the kind of focused determination that had characterized everything Cole had seen her do. Even facing the most fundamental challenge of human existence, she approached it with practical courage. "Tell me about the ranch," she said during a brief respite between contractions. "The real ranch, not the careful stories you've been telling me." Cole understood what she was doing, giving her mind something to focus on besides the pain. 30,000 acres of the best grazing land in the territory. Main house sits on a hill overlooking the valley, with corrals and barns spread out below. Gardens that my mother planted 40 years ago, still blooming every spring. How many men work for you? 23, full-time, more during roundup season. Good men, most of them. Loyal. Cole smoothed her hair back from her face. They'll love you, Martha. They'll love the baby. Will they? A woman who showed up out of nowhere, pregnant with another man's child. Cole was quiet for a moment, thinking of his crew and their attitudes toward outsiders. They'll follow my lead, and my lead is that you're family now, which makes the baby family too. Martha's eyes filled with tears at the simple certainty in his voice. You really mean that, don't you? About us being family. I've never meant anything more in my life. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation, and Jim called out from his position by the window. It's the midwife. Rosa's here, and she's brought her daughter to help. Relief flooded through Cole as Rosa Delgado bustled into the cabin, a compact woman in her 50s with the no-nonsense manner of someone who'd delivered half the babies in the territory. Her daughter Carmen followed, carrying a bag of supplies and looking calm, despite the unusual circumstances. "Senora," Rosa said to Martha in accented English, "how long have the pains been coming?" "About 6 hours, but stronger in the last 2, Martha replied. Rosa examined Martha with practiced efficiency, while Carmen began heating water over a small fire Jim had built in the cabin's unfinished fireplace. "First baby?" "Yes." "Good position, healthy mother. This little one wants to meet the world today." Rosa looked around at the men standing awkwardly near the walls. "Everybody out except the father." "I'll stay," Cole said without hesitation. "You sure, Jeff?" Jim asked. "Childbirth ain't exactly." "I'm staying," Cole repeated firmly. As the other men retreated to establish a perimeter around the cabin, Cole found himself alone with Martha and the 2 women who would help bring new life into the world. Through the gaps in the walls, he could see his men positioned strategically around the property, their rifles ready, but their attention focused on the horizon where threats might appear. "You know," Rosa said conversationally as she prepared for the delivery, "in 30 years of catching babies, I've never done it with armed guards, standing watch. There are men who wish my family harm," Cole explained. "I won't take chances with Martha's safety or the baby's." Rosa studied him with shrewd eyes. "Your family? This Senora? She is your wife?" Cole met Martha's gaze across the small space, seeing in her eyes the same question Rosa had asked. They'd spoken of love and commitment, but they'd never made it official. In the eyes of the law and the church, they were still strangers who'd found each other in the desert. "She will be," Cole said firmly, "as soon as we can arrange it." "Ah," Rosa said with satisfaction, "a good man. The baby will be lucky to have such a papa." Martha felt her heart swell at the easy way Cole claimed both her and the child she carried. Here was a man who could have chosen the safety of his solitary life, who could have helped her to the claim and then ridden away. Instead, he was kneeling beside her during the most vulnerable moment of her life, claiming them both as his own in front of witnesses. Another contraction seized her, stronger than any before, and Martha knew the moment was approaching when everything would change. The baby was coming, ready or not, into a world where love and danger existed side by side, where the promise of family was balanced against the threat of violence. But as she looked at Cole's face in the lamplight, seeing the determination and tenderness there, Martha felt a peace she hadn't expected. Whatever came next, they would face it together, man and woman, mother and father, family bound not by blood or law, but by the choice to love despite the risks. The sound of gunfire in the distance reminded them all that their enemies hadn't given up. But inside the cabin, a different kind of battle was being fought, the ancient struggle to bring new life safely into the world, witnessed by a man who was discovering what it truly meant to have something worth protecting. The gunfire grew closer as Martha's labor reached its final stage, creating a surreal counterpoint to the miracle unfolding inside the unfinished cabin. Dutch Morrison and his men had indeed circled back, and they were now engaged in a running battle with Cole's ranch hands and the neighbors who'd rallied to defend the small homestead. "The baby's crowning," Rosa announced calmly, as if bullets weren't flying outside the thin walls. "Senora, when the next pain comes, you push with everything you have." Martha gripped Cole's hand so tightly he thought she might break bones, but he welcomed the pain as a small share of what she was enduring. Through the gaps in the walls, he could see muzzle flashes in the gathering dusk and hear Jim Hawkins shouting orders to the men defending their position. "I have to go help them," Cole said, torn between his duty to his men and his desire to stay with Martha. "You have to stay here," Martha gasped between contractions. "This baby needs its father present for its first breath." The word father hit Cole like a physical blow. In all his calculations about wealth and responsibility, he'd never truly grasped the reality of what was happening. He was about to become a parent, to take on the most fundamental responsibility one human being could accept for another. "Push now, Senora," Rosa commanded. Martha bore down with a strength that amazed Cole, her face flushed with effort and determination. Outside, the sound of gunfire intensified, and he could hear his foreman calling for more ammunition. The battle was reaching its climax just as new life prepared to enter the world. "I can see the head," Carmen called out excitedly. "Dark hair like Mama's." Cole found himself crying without shame, overwhelmed by the miracle he was witnessing. This child, Thomas's biological child, but his in every way that would matter, was about to take its first breath under the most dramatic circumstances imaginable. Another gunshot cracked close to the cabin, and a bullet splintered the wood near the window. Cole instinctively moved to shield Martha with his body, even as Rosa continued her work with unflappable calm. "One more push, Senora. Give me one more good push and we'll have this baby in the world." Martha summoned reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, bearing down with everything she had while Cole whispered words of encouragement and love. The sound of the battle outside faded to background noise as the most important moment of their lives unfolded in the lamplight. With a rush that seemed to stop time itself, the baby emerged into Rosa's waiting Hansa, perfect, tiny human being, who immediately announced its displeasure with the world by letting out a strong, healthy cry. "A son," Rosa declared, holding up the squalling infant. "A beautiful, healthy son." Cole stared at the baby in amazement, seeing in the tiny features a combination of strength and vulnerability that took his breath away. This was Thomas's child, but looking at the small face, Cole knew with absolute certainty that genetics mattered far less than commitment. This boy would be his son in every way that counted. "Let me hold him," Martha whispered, exhausted but radiant. As Rosa placed the baby on Martha's chest, Cole felt something fundamental shift inside him. The walls he'd built around his heart over decades of loss and disappointment crumbled in the face of this tiny life that depended completely on the adults surrounding him. "Hello, little one," Martha murmured, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to the world." The baby's cries quieted at the sound of his mother's voice, and his tiny hand emerged from the blanket Rosa had wrapped around him. Without thinking, Cole extended his finger, and the infant's hand closed around it with surprising strength. "He knows you," Martha said softly. "He knows his papa's voice." The word papa sent another wave of emotion through Cole. Here was this perfect little person who would never know the man whose blood he carried, but who would grow up with Cole as his father in every meaningful sense. The responsibility was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Outside, the gunfire had stopped, and Jim Hawkins' voice called out triumphantly, "Boss! Morrison's down and the rest are running. We got 'em!" Cole barely heard the news of their victory. So focused was he on the small hand gripping his finger and the woman who'd made this miracle possible. The external danger had passed, but the real adventure was just beginning, the long, complicated, beautiful challenge of raising a child and building a family. "What will we name him?" Martha asked, looking down at their son with wonder. Cole thought of Thomas Reyes, the man whose dreams had brought Martha to Arizona territory, and whose death had set in motion the chain of events that led to this moment. "Thomas," he said without hesitation, "Thomas Mercer, after his first father, carrying the name of his second." Martha's eyes filled with fresh tears at the generosity of the gesture. By giving the baby Thomas's name, Cole was honoring the man who'd come before, while claiming the child as his own. "Thomas Mercer," she repeated softly. "It's perfect." Rosa finished her work with practiced efficiency, ensuring that both mother and baby were healthy and stable. Carmen cleaned up the supplies while keeping watch at the window, where the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "Senora will need rest and good food," Rosa instructed Cole. "The baby, too, will want to nurse soon. You have a strong wife and a healthy son. God has blessed you both." As the midwife and her daughter prepared to leave, Jim appeared in the doorway with a huge grin on his weathered face. "Boss, I hate to interrupt, but the preacher's here from Dry Mesa. Came with the sheriff when he heard about the trouble." Cole looked at Martha, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. They'd spoken of marriage, of becoming a real family, but the baby's arrival had overtaken their plans. Now, with little Thomas sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms and their enemies defeated, the moment seemed perfect for making their commitment official. "What do you think?" Cole asked Martha gently. "Ready to make this family legal?" Martha smiled, exhausted but happier than she'd ever imagined possible. "I can't think of a better wedding present than the one we just received." The wedding ceremony took place by lamplight in the unfinished cabin, with baby Thomas sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms, and the sound of celebration drifting in from the men gathered outside. Preacher Samuel Webb, a kindly man in his 60s who'd officiated at frontier weddings in far stranger circumstances, opened his worn Bible and smiled at the unusual scene before him. "Well now," he said in his gentle drawl, "I've married folks in saloons and on mountaintops, but I believe this is my first wedding in a cabin with no roof and armed guards standing watch." Martha laughed softly, her face glowing with joy despite her exhaustion. She wore the lace handkerchief that had belonged to her mother, pinned to her dress, the only precious thing she had left from her family, now serving as her something old for this new beginning. "Are we ready to proceed?" the preacher asked. Cole looked down at Martha and the baby, feeling his heart swell with emotions he'd forgotten he was capable of experiencing. "We're ready. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony," Preacher Webb began, his voice carrying easily in the small space. Jim Hawkins stood in the doorway as Cole's best man, grinning from ear to ear despite the fresh bandage on his arm from the recent battle. Rosa had agreed to serve as Martha's matron of honor, her presence lending a maternal blessing to the proceedings. Cole Mercer, the preacher continued, "Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Cole's voice was steady and sure. "I do." "And do you, Martha Reyes, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Martha looked up at Cole, seeing in his eyes the same wonder and determination she felt in her own heart. "I do." "The rings?" Preacher Webb asked. Cole reached into his pocket and withdrew his father's signet, ring-heavy gold, engraved with the Mercer family crest. It was far too large for Martha's delicate finger, but it was the only ring he had to offer. Martha slipped Thomas's simple gold band from her finger, the ring she'd worn through months of grief and struggle, now ready to pass it forward as a symbol of new love built on the foundation of old. "With this ring, I thee wed," Cole said, sliding his father's ring onto Martha's thumb where it would stay secure. The gesture was clumsy but sincere, and Martha's eyes filled with tears at the symbolism she was being welcomed into a family that had endured for generations. "With this ring, I thee wed," Martha replied, placing Thomas's ring on Cole's finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for him, and Cole understood that he was accepting not just Martha's love, but also the responsibility to honor the memory of the man who'd come before him. Baby Thomas stirred in his mother's arms, making soft sounds that seemed to bless the proceedings. The timing was perfect. This child would grow up knowing that his parents had chosen each other freely, that their family had been born from love rather than mere circumstance. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Preacher Webb declared with satisfaction. "Cole, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle and reverent, full of promise and hope for the future they would build together. When they broke apart, Martha was crying happy tears, and Cole found his own eyes suspiciously moist. "Ladies and gentlemen," the preacher announced to the small gathering, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Cole Mercer and young Master Thomas Mercer." The men outside erupted in cheers and whistles, their celebrations echoing across the desert night. Jim produced a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion, and even Rosa accepted a small glass to toast the new family. "To the boss and his lady," Jim called out, raising his glass, "and to little Thomas may he grow up to be half the man his father is." "To new beginnings," Cole replied, lifting his own glass while keeping his other arm around Martha's shoulders. As the impromptu celebration continued around them, Martha nursed baby Thomas for the first time, while Cole marveled at the transformation that had taken place in his life over the course of just 1 week. 7 days ago, he'd been a lonely, bitter man, convinced that solitude was safer than connection. Now he was a husband and father, surrounded by people who mattered to him more than his own life. "Are you happy?" Martha asked softly, looking up at him with eyes that held their own answer. "I didn't know I could be this happy," Cole admitted. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to have a family." "Well, you have one now," Martha said with a smile, "complete with a son who's going to need feeding every few hours and a wife who doesn't know the first thing about running a big ranch." "We'll figure it out together," Cole promised. "All of it." As the evening wound down and their guests began to depart, Cole found himself alone with his new family in the cabin that would serve as their temporary home until they could move to the main house of the Broken Spur. The building was still unfinished, the walls were full of gaps, and bullet holes from the recent battle served as unwelcome decorations. But it felt more like home than any place Cole had lived in 20 years. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, testing the sound of her new name. "I like the sound of that," Martha replied, settling baby Thomas in the makeshift crib Jim had constructed from a wooden crate and soft blankets. "Tomorrow, we'll head to the ranch," Cole said. You'll have a proper bed, hot baths whenever you want them, and more help than you'll know what to do with. Will they accept us? Your men, I mean. A woman they've never met suddenly appearing as the boss's wife, with a baby that's obviously not yours. Cole considered the question seriously. His crew was loyal, but they were also set in their ways and suspicious of outsiders. Introducing a new wife and instant family would require careful handling. They'll follow my lead, he said finally. And my lead is that you're family now. Anyone who can't accept that will find work elsewhere. Martha nodded, trusting in his confidence even as she felt nervous about the challenges ahead. She'd gone from being a poor widow walking alone through the desert to being the wife of one of the territory's wealthiest ranchers with a newborn son to care for and a household to manage. The transformation was overwhelming when she let herself think about it. One day at a time, Cole said, as if reading her thoughts. We'll take it one day at a time, and we'll face whatever comes together. As they settled in for their first night as a married couple, with baby Thomas sleeping peacefully between them and the stars shining through the gaps in the roof, both understood that they'd found something rare and precious in each other. Love had grown from the simplest act of kindness, a cup of water shared with a stranger, and had blossomed into a family that would weather whatever storms the future might bring. The Broken Spur Ranch waited for them in the distance, representing not just a place to live, but a legacy to build and pass on to the next generation. And in the morning, they would begin the journey toward that future, together. 3 months had passed, since that extraordinary day when bullets and birth cries had mingled in the desert air. Now, as autumn painted the Arizona mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Martha stood on the wraparound porch of the Broken Spur's main house, watching Cole work with a young colt in the corral below. Baby Thomas slept peacefully in her arms, his tiny fist curled around the carved wooden rattle that Jim Hawkins had whittled for him. The transition to ranch life had been easier than Martha had dared hope. Cole's men, initially suspicious of their boss's sudden marriage, had been won over by Martha's genuine kindness and her obvious devotion to both Cole and the baby. She'd proven herself capable of everything from helping with difficult births among the cattle to cooking meals for 30 men during roundup season. "Senora Mercer," came Rosa's voice from behind her. The midwife had become a regular visitor and unofficial grandmother to Thomas, often stopping by to check on the family's progress. "The little one grows stronger every day." "He does," Martha agreed, smiling down at her son. Thomas had Cole's strong jawline but her dark eyes, and his personality already showed signs of the determination that had brought his parents together. "He's going to be walking before we know it, and getting into everything just like his papa did at that age," Rosa said with a laugh. "Senora Cole's mother, she used to tell stories about that boy always climbing where he shouldn't, always asking questions nobody could answer." Martha treasured these glimpses into Cole's childhood, filling in the gaps in her knowledge of the man who'd become her husband. The Broken Spur held decades of Mercer family history in its walls and grounds, and she was slowly learning to see herself as part of that continuing story. "The new house is coming along well," Rosa observed, gesturing toward the construction site visible in the distance. Cole had insisted on building Martha her own house, on the original claim land, not because he wanted distance from the main ranch, but because he understood her need to honor Thomas Reyes's dreams. The new structure would serve as a line house for the eastern pastures, while giving Martha a place that was truly hers, where she could remember her first husband while building a life with her second. "Cole says we'll be able to move in by Christmas," Martha said. "It seems strange to think of having 2 homes, but I'm grateful he understands why it matters." The sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the road leading up to the ranch house. A small caravan was making its way toward them, Cole's lawyer from Tucson, accompanied by several official-looking men Martha didn't recognize. "Expecting company?" Rosa asked. "Cole mentioned some business meetings today," Martha replied, though she sensed these weren't ordinary ranch business discussions. Cole emerged from the corral and walked up to the house, his face serious but not troubled. As the visitors dismounted and tied their horses to the hitching rail, Martha could see legal documents changing hands and hear fragments of conversation about property deeds and territorial jurisdiction. "What's happening?" Martha asked as Cole joined her on the porch. "Remember Dutch Morrison and his claims about Jake promising him land?" Cole said, bouncing Thomas gently as the baby began to fuss. Turns out there were some legal complications from the old range war that needed sorting out. The territorial government's been investigating land disputes from that period. Martha felt a flutter of concern. "Is our claim in jeopardy?" "Not anymore," Cole said with satisfaction. "The opposite, actually. The investigation found that Morrison and his associates had been using forged documents to intimidate small ranchers into selling their land below value. Your original deed to the 40 acres is completely valid, and the territorial authorities are returning several other properties to their rightful owners. What does that mean for us?" Cole's smile was both proud and amused. "It means that Mrs. Martha Mercer is now the sole owner of some of the most valuable grazing land in the territory, completely independent of her husband's holdings. You're a woman of property in your own right." Martha stared at him in amazement. "But I don't know anything about managing property investments." "Lucky for you, you married a man with some experience in that area," Cole said with a grin. "Though I suspect you'll pick it up faster than you think. You've got good instincts for land and livestock." The legal proceedings took most of the afternoon, with documents signed and witnessed, while Thomas napped in his crib inside the house. When the lawyers finally departed, Cole and Martha found themselves alone on the porch as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. "I've been thinking," Martha said, settling into the rocking chair Cole had commissioned especially for her, "about names." "What kind of names?" "For the ranch. Your ranch will always be the broken spur that's family tradition. But my land, the new place we're building, I'd like to call it something that honors where we came from." Cole leaned against the porch railing, interested. "What did you have in mind?" "The cottonwood, after the tree where we met." Martha's voice grew soft with memory. "That tree gave us shade when we needed it most, shelter when we were both lost. Seems fitting that the land should carry that name." "The cottonwood," Cole repeated, testing the sound. "I like it. Thomas will grow up knowing the story of how his parents found each other under that tree." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Thomas began crying from inside the house. Martha rose to tend to him, but Cole gestured for her to stay seated. "I'll get him," he said. "You've been up with him twice already today." Martha watched her husband disappear into the house and emerge moments later with their son, who immediately quieted at the familiar sound of Cole's voice. The sight of this strong man speaking gentle nonsense to a 3-month-old baby never failed to move her. "You're a natural father," she observed as Cole settled beside her with Thomas in his arms. "I'm learning," Cole replied. "Some days I feel like I'm making it up as I go along." That's what all parents do, I think. Even the ones who seem to have everything figured out. They sat in comfortable silence as the day faded around them, watching the familiar rhythm of ranch life continue in the corrals and pastures below. The men were bringing in the horses for the night, and smoke was beginning to rise from the bunkhouse chimney where someone was preparing the evening meal. "Do you ever think about him?" Cole asked quietly. "Thomas, I mean. Wonder what he'd think of all this." Martha considered the question, feeling no pain at the mention of her first husband's name. Time and love had healed those wounds, though the scars remained as gentle reminders of what she'd lost and found. "I think he'd be happy," she said finally. "He wanted me to have a good life, wanted his child to grow up safe and loved. I think he'd approve of the man who made that possible. Even though I'm nothing like him." Martha looked at Cole with surprise. "What makes you say that?" "You've told me about Tomash's faith in people, his willingness to sacrifice for others, his optimism about human nature. I'm not sure I measure up to that standard." "You stopped for me when I was in labor," Martha pointed out. "You claimed me as your wife to protect me from your enemies. You're raising another man's child as your own son and giving him your family name. How is that not sacrificing for others?" Cole was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. "I never thought of it that way. Thomas believed the world would reward goodness with goodness," Martha continued. "He was wrong about the timing goodness. Doesn't always get rewarded quickly or obviously. But in the long run, I think he was right. His goodness brought me to you, and your goodness gave us this family. Baby Thomas chose that moment to grab at Cole's finger with his tiny hand, holding on with the determined grip that had become his signature gesture. Looking down at the small face that trusted him completely, Cole felt the same overwhelming sense of responsibility and wonder that had filled him during those first moments in the desert cabin. "He's getting big," Cole observed, marveling at how much the baby had grown in just 3 months. "Rosa says he'll be sitting up on his own soon, and then crawling, and then walking, and then we'll really have our hands full." "I can't wait," Cole said, and meant it completely. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Martha reached into her apron pocket and withdrew a brass key, ornate and heavy, clearly crafted for an important lock. "Jim gave me this today. He said it was time I had it." Cole recognized the key immediately. It opened the front door of the main house, the symbolic passing of authority from one generation to the next. His mother had carried that key for 40 years before her death, and it had sat in Jim's keeping ever since, waiting for the next mistress of the broken spur. "It's yours by right," Cole said simply. "This is your home now, yours and Thomas's." Martha closed her fingers around the key, feeling its weight and significance. She thought of the woman who'd carried it before her, of the generations of Mercer wives who'd built their lives around this land and this family. Now she was part of that legacy, responsible for passing it on to the next generation. "I love you," she said, looking at Cole with eyes that held no shadows of doubt or regret. "I love you too," Cole replied, "both of you." As they prepared to go inside for the night, Martha took one last look at the desert landscape that had brought them together. Somewhere out there, a cottonwood tree still stood in the place where 2 lost souls had found each other and discovered that love could indeed grow in the most unlikely ground. The future stretched ahead of them, full of the usual challenges that came with ranching in harsh country and raising a family in an unpredictable world. But they would face those challenges together, bound by love and strengthened by the knowledge that sometimes the most important journeys began with the simple decision to help a stranger in need. Inside the house, the family settled into their evening routines, Thomas fed and content, Martha reading by lamplight, while Cole reviewed the day's accounts. It was an ordinary domestic scene that would have seemed impossible just 4 months earlier, when both adults had been certain that their capacity for love and family had been permanently damaged by loss. But love, they'd learned, was more resilient than either had imagined. Given the right conditions, honesty, kindness, and the courage to remain open to possibility, it could flourish even in the hardest ground, creating something beautiful enough to last for generations.